So Lupe and I are here eating a really good gyro. If you haven't been to Wu and gotten your gyro, you should. It's delicious. There's mine. Yeah, high quality, very clean. They got a 100 on their score for cleanliness. So whenever you're coming down Mulberry, when you want a good gyro, I would say come here. Good evening, everybody. This is the Hillbilly Think Tank, and I am Spencer Keck coming at you live from here in Hardin County, where we know that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what makes everything worthwhile. And y'all, we need more life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because right now we've got a government system set up that just, it doesn't really work for the people. It's not of the people, by the people, and for the people. So let's talk about it. Again, like I said, this is the Hillbilly Think Tank. I am the educated hillbilly. No, that's not an oxymoron. Don't call me a moron. There have been educated, erudite, and emancipated folks here in Kentucky ever since my kith and kin came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone. So tonight, we're going to talk about the decider who doesn't know what he doesn't know. And this is Trump, the Fed, Iran, and, drumroll please, the Dunning-Krueger presidency. So, if you're not sure what the Dunning-Krueger effect is, let's go on ahead and do a quick reminder from one of my favorite scientific professors who kind of lays it out pretty well, in my opinion.
It's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. And so there's this sort of valley in there, a valley of false confidence. This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Krueger effect. It's the phenomenon where a little bit of knowledge, you over-assess how much of that subject you actually know. Ultimately, learning enough to know whether you are right or wrong. It requires years and years of study, especially looking through journals where new ideas are published and contested. It's possible to know.
So that's a pretty quick, down and dirty explanation of the Dunning-Krueger effect. Basically, just a little bit, kind of like the ad says, you stayed at that special hotel last night and now you're an expert. So this is what we've got right now in the shape of our presidency. So, we've got policy and economy that are being run by a bunch of blowhards, idiots, folks who, their only qualification is they know how to kiss the arse of the king. And that was one of the biggest problems we had with monarchy when we decided to break away from it back in 1776, wasn't it? That's what I understand. With a monarchy, with a dictatorship, with an autocracy, you can't have dissent. And when you don't have dissent, you don't get the fact that you might be in the wrong. You don't get a well-rounded view of the whole world and your situation. So, psychology and political analysis tells us that the Dunning-Krueger effect is a serious problem if your country is being run by it. So Informed, serious, but accessible, occasionally dry wit can be part of good leadership, but we need real intelligence to make decisions that have the weight of the world on them. And we are, you decide, world leaders. And what we said, the world knew, hey, overall, yes, we're in it for ourselves, but we also had community spirit when it came to the community of democracy. So picture this, the most powerful man in the world walks into a half constructed building in the summer heat, hard hat on, suit jacket still buttoned. He points at a document and tells the room that the cost overruns are even worse than reported. The man standing next to him, the head of the most powerful financial institution in the world, puts on his reading glasses, examines the paper, and quietly tells the pompous president in front of cameras that he's got the numbers wrong. Well, we know that's exactly what happened. That image, Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell at the Fed's renovation site in 2025, became one of the defining photos of the Trump presidency. And in some ways, it's a perfect metaphor for everything that we're going to talk about today. So, again, I'm Spencer Keck. I am running for magistrate in District 3. Now, we say that all politics is local. Well, it is. But local politics relies on a lot of federal grants, state grants. And if we got folks managing these grants that are beset by the Dunning-Krueger effect, then that affects our local politics. And it has, and it will continue to if we don't recognize it for what it is. So today, we're going to dive into 3 interlocking stories that together form a portrait of a presidency defined by confrontation with expertise. Now, confrontation with expertise, that sounds highfalutin, but it's really not. All of us have jobs that are important in this economy and in this nation. I can't go tell my local barber how to cut my hair because I've never cut hair before. I have to assume that he's truly an expert, that his training as a barber means something, and the certificate he has there, showing that he's certified actually means something. But if I'm going to step in there and try to direct his every move as he cuts my hair, he's going to say, you know what? Go grab some scissors, grab a bowl, do it yourself. And I'll get that bowl cut because I have no clue. All right. So, Frontline, this has a new documentary. It's called The President versus the Fed. And this premiered on PBS. It will tonight, May 12th, 2026. And let's look at a little preview of what is to come, because that is the inspiration of all this. And you can even watch it on YouTube, on all kinds of other formats, not just PBS. Watch it online if you have PBS online. So, yeah, let's actually get a look at what it is that spurred this interest, for me, of the Dunning-Krueger effect and its combination.
Economically, this is the most important fight of the second Trump administration.
If I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast.
This agency feels it is not under any obligation to be accountable.
You think that this is all part of an effort to get his hands on this powerful economic lever?
I think he's been very clear about that.
It's not just a struggle between President Trump and Chair Powell. It's a struggle over the future design of the federal government.
So that's what we're up against. This is a struggle with the future design of the American government and what is it going to do to us in the long run? So we have got a serious situation at hand, right? We know that this president, he set up this battle with the Fed chairman. And what serious economic journalism, including from The Economist, has told us about Trump's war with the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, and what's at stake for the global economy is this. We have to also understand the third thread that's running through this is psychological, through all of it. What the Dunning-Krueger effect tells us about a president who is too confident in what he doesn't know, and not just at the Fed, but in his other great conflicts of this term, the war with Iran. So he's got a war with the Fed, and he's got a war with Iran running at the same time. Now, this is a big show that he's got going on. And, everything for him is it's back to he's got to be in the media and he's got to make everything a spectacle. So let's look at it. For 113 years, nothing like it. That's what Frontline documentary found. So tonight on Frontline, PBS's flagship investigative documentary unit, it premiered this show, The President versus the Fed. And it's directed by James Jacoby and Anya Berg, the same team behind The Age of Easy Money and The Power of the Fed. This is in some ways the third chapter of a trilogy that they've been building about the Federal Reserve's role in modern American life. So it lands at this extraordinary moment. Powell's term as Fed chair is going to literally end on May 15th, 3 days from now. His successor, Kevin Warsh, is Trump's pick. And we know his picks are yes men and women. Of course, he's kicked out most of the women, so mostly yes men. So this film is dropping, right at the cliff edge where we are now. And let's look at what Congress actually built when it created the Federal Reserve in 1913. The whole architecture of the Fed, staggered terms for governors, the inability of a president to remove a member except for cause, the independence from the Treasury, this was all intentional. It was by design. It was designed to insulate monetary policy from the election cycle. The idea being politicians have a structural incentive to want cheap money right now, even if it causes inflation later. The Fed's job is to be the adult in the room. And no matter what party we have in the Oval Office, we know their gain comes from cheap money right away to make us, the masses, happy and placated. But for 113 years, this structure has held up. Imperfectly, yes, certainly, of course. But Nixon famously pressured Fed Chair Arthur Bones, as he nicknamed him, Burns, in the early 1970s, and Burns appeared to capitulate, contributing to the wage price spiral that defined that decade. But even Nixon did it in whispers. What Frontline documents is something qualitatively different. This president doesn't whisper. Everything is telegraphed for us. The documentary features a remarkable interview with Neil Kashkari, a sitting Federal Reserve official who speaks directly about the Trump administration's threat to pursue a Department of Justice criminal investigation into Powell. Not over policy, mind you, but over building renovations. Kashkari is unambiguous about what he sees happening. Now, this is the timeline. from the film that I think is going to be quoted for years. Kashgari says, of course, I'm paraphrasing carefully here, that in the entire 113-year history of the Fed, nothing like this has happened before. He calls it a pretext, that the administration's real message was, we don't like your monetary policy decisions, so we're going to change the people making the decisions. Now, the renovation investigation, the attempted firing of Fed Governor Lisa Cook over mortgage fraud allegations that courts later blocked, the public social media posts calling Powell too late and wrong. These aren't random incidents. Frontline presents them as a coordinated pressure campaign. Let's just think about this irony for a bit. The president is trying to send Powell to task and to court for remodeling wrongs. Who is it that now's demanding via the Senate $1 billion for an East Wing project that we were told was going to be completely handled by donations from billionaires from the Epstein class? Well, anyway, okay, so this coordinated pressure campaign, Powell himself, in an unprecedented public video response, called these actions pretexts. A Fed chair going on camera to call out the president of the United States. We've never seen it before. It has never happened before. Now, the film is balanced. Trump's defenders get a voice too. Judy Shelton, a former Trump economic advisor, tells Frontline that Powell has behaved like an emperor. That's the Fed's independence has shielded it from accountability for its own failures, including getting inflation badly wrong after the pandemic. And there is something, of course, real in that critique. Powell's description of post-COVID inflation as likely transitory was later called by Mohammed El-Errarian probably the worst inflation call in the history of the Federal Reserve. So the documentary isn't a simple Trump bad, Powell good morality play. It's something harder than that. When an institution fails and a president attacks it, is he attacking the failure or attacking the independence that allows it to correct its course? And the journalist Christopher Leonard in the film frames Trump's motivation starkly. When you look at Trump's economic agenda, this fight is actually the most consequential of the presidency. Now, the argument being that Trump's entire political brand, the deal maker who delivers a booming economy, depends on cheap money. Low interest rates fuel stock markets, fuel the sense of prosperity that is Trump's political oxygen. Powell, by keeping interest rates higher than Trump wanted, was, in Trump's eyes, sabotaging him. Now that brings us to the question of incentives versus competence. Remember, we're back to a bit of the Dunning-Krueger effect here. Is Trump's war on the Fed purely cynical, a power grab dressed up in an economic grievance? Or does he genuinely believe he understands monetary policy better than Jerome Powell? I'd argue both are true simultaneously. And that's where our psychological framework becomes important, this Dunning-Krueger effect. But let's hold that thought for a moment, because one more piece of the documentary that I think is critical context for everything else is this. The film ends by noting that with the Iran war driving a new supply shock and with tariff-related inflation already biting Kevin Warsh, Trump's chosen successor to Powell, he will inherit an economy in genuine trouble. And he will face a Federal Reserve Board that, because Powell is staying on as the governor until 2028, will not simply roll over. The battle doesn't end with Powell's chairmanship. The shadow Fed chair situation is fascinating, of course. Some economists are calling Powell a potential shadow chair, still on the board, potentially dissenting against Warsh's rate cuts, still a voice that the market listens to. Trump wanted to end Powell's power. He may have actually extended that power. So let's take a little break, look at some dogs running around, look at some comments, and come back as we mull over, right, what it means in this most consequential fight that we've seen so far. Man. Clued in on the Dunning-Krueger effect 14 or 15 years ago in the course of my preparation for one of my cycling education certifications. So Tom is a major cyclist, and he is a great fixer of bikes. He's done so for me. Thank you, Tom. It's astonishing how often it applies. I'm talking about the Dunning-Krueger effect, especially to public figures like this Kakistarak, I like this, but I don't know how to say it properly, currently befiling the people's White House. Yeah. So this kakistocracy, that's what we're talking about, right? So this kakistocracy is definitely befiling the people's White House. We got Tom on here saying also, it's always entertaining to watch dogs jaw wrestling. All right, audio is off, audio is back on. Gosh, I don't know how much was lost there. That sucks. All right, y'all. So again, we're looking at a very consequential fight. This is so consequential. You know, serious economic journalism has said that we don't know if we're going to really recover from this. If we are, it's going to be long-term pain. So let's just zoom out from the documentary that we're talking about and look at the broader economic analysis. Because, you know, the ground stakes here are something beyond political drama. The Fed's independence isn't an abstract technocratic preference. You know, guys, like I said, I'm just a hillbilly. I took some courses in economics in college. I knew that I wanted to one day run for office. So I wanted to have a clue about what I was getting into and asking to get into. But I also don't want to be the Dunning-Krueger that I'm describing. But let's just, you know, look at it a little bit and realize again, yeah, I've got a college education, but it also wasn't in finance. So I need to look carefully at what I'm talking about. I have managed multi-million-dollar budgets in medical departments in the Navy. I know what it's like to manage logistically the cost of a whole battle-ready medical department, war-ready medical department. So, economics is they're just a serious deal. And this one that we're talking about, it's not just a technocratic preference, like I said. It has a measurable effect on something very, very concrete to us, and that's inflation expectations. We're all being beset by inflation right now. And we need to know that we're not, like I said earlier, trying to tell our barber how to cut our hair. Okay? We've got someone highly certified, highly trained, highly with expertise in how to manage the Federal Reserve. We've really set this up years ago to try to come up with the best solution. Especially, we bolstered it after the Great Depression. So, when investors believe that the Fed will raise rates to control inflation regardless of political pressure, they don't price inflation risk into long-term bonds and mortgages. The moment they doubt that, the moment they think that the Fed chair is going to be, an ass kisser, beholden to whoever's in the White House, well, you get what economists call it an inflation risk premium. Borrowing costs go up. Mortgages get way more expensive. The very thing Trump wants to make cheaper get more expensive because of his attacks on the institution. Now, it's a pressure campaign that defeats its own purpose, at least on the inflation and the rates front. And this is why economists were alarmed when Trump announced what he called the Trump rule, essentially demanding that rates be cut regardless of what inflation data showed. Now, Nixon did something similar in 1972, and the consequence was a decade of stagflation. Burns lowered the rates under political pressure. The result was that inflation became embedded, requiring Paul Volcker to later raise rates to nearly 20% to break its back, causing a brutal recession. The history is not obscure. It's economics 101. And probably many of us watching this show took economics 101. Like I'm saying, I took that a touch more to be ready for what I'm getting into or asking you to allow me to get into now. But the administration has dismissed economics 101. And this is a key problem that we're looking at. So, the episode at the Fed renovation site that I described in the cold open is actually illustrative in a precise way. Trump claimed confidently that the cost overruns were larger than the official $2.5 billion figure. Powell looked at the document and corrected him politely, professionally, publicly. Now, does a narcissist like to be corrected publicly, no matter how politely or professionally? Methinks not. Trump had the wrong number. And this is a man who, on the basis of building hotels and casinos, believes he understands construction costs, real estate finance, and by God, an extension, the entire architecture of monetary policy. Now, as an aside, let's remember this is a guy who bankrupted casinos and the hotels that went along with them. That's just an aside. All right. So, the attempted firing of Governor Lisa Cook is worth dwelling on. A president firing a sitting Fed governor, not because of any defined caused under the law, but apparently over unproven fraud allegations that the courts found insufficient. This represents a genuine rupture. Multiple former Fed chairs and former economic advisors filed a legal brief with the Supreme Court warning about the implications of this. The court's ruling is still pending. And now, with the Iran conflict adding a massive supply shock on top of tariff-driven inflation, oil markets disrupted, the Strait of Hormuz in play, shipping costs surging, and the Fed faces exactly the kind of stagflationary environment where political interference is absolutely deplorable. All right, pause here a second. Looks like we got another comment. Let me just address that real quick, not ignore anybody here tonight. So, looks like we've got Terry Nash. Terry Nash says, what is the only way you create inflation? All right. So, Terry, what is the only way we create inflation? That's what you're wanting to, you're going to tell me, or do you want me to keep on trying to explain what I've been doing? Yeah. All right. So, we know that shipping costs are surging. We know that the Iran conflict, again, it has added such an massive supply shock on top of tariff-driven inflation, like I was saying earlier. Now the oil markets, they're disrupted. The Strait of Hormuz, yeah, we're losing that battle. Well, the Fed is going to face that same type of stagflationary environment where Nixon took us, but now we're going even beyond. We're into the red danger zone. The Fed held rates steady in a rare 8-4 vote just days ago. Only Stephen Moran, Trump's own nominee to the board, voted for a cut. That's significant. That's how politically isolated Trump's position is within the institution he's trying to control. And Warsh, he's going to be inheriting this landscape. He may find that even if he wants to cut rates to please Trump, well, the economic data simply won't allow it without triggering the very inflation crisis Trump would blame on everyone else. All right, so now we're going to come to our third segment. This is the Dunning-Krueger presidency. What psychology explains that politics cannot, maybe even should not, I'm not sure. But again, all right. We got another comment on here. Bull says memory shortage. All right, y'all, let's take a quick puppy break before we come back and talk about this Dunning-Krueger effect presidency. All right, we're back. So before we do dive into the Dunning-Krueger, let's just go back again and look at a glaring example of the Dunning-Krueger effect in action and how, yeah, this is where we're at now. Here we go.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us.
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added. Yeah, you just added in the third building. Is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up.
So, right there, the most narcissistic Dunning-Krueger effect that, I can imagine. I am amazed that Mr. Powell could remain so calm in a situation like that. So, again, when you're dealing with a narcissistic personality, in addition to someone with this Dunning-Krueger presidency, we're talking about, man, not a stable genius, that's for sure. So the cognitive framework that I think is this missing explanatory layer in a most political coverage of Trump is the Dunning-Krueger effect. For listeners who may not be familiar, again, with the Dunning-Krueger effect, I know I just had someone explain it. We'll come back and have even other people explain it. But it's that cognitive bias, first formally identified by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999. In its core formulation, people with limited knowledge or skill in a particular domain tend to overestimate their competence in that domain. They don't know what they don't know. And crucially, the very deficits in knowledge that make them unskilled in that arena also prevent them from recognizing their own incompetence. So, the popular formulation of this Dunning-Krueger effect, it's often sometimes just too broad. It doesn't mean that stupid people think they're smart in general. It's not what it means. It's domain specific. So the domain we're talking about, of course, is the Federal Reserve and everything that goes along with it. That vast accrual of knowledge with everyone that's on the board, including right now, the head of it, Jerome Powell, right? That's the domain we're talking about. It's a world-class surgeon, might be completely Dunning-Krueger about monetary policy. Think about it. The surgeon can work on a brain, but if you go to try to tell them, hey, I want you to run the economy of the United States and run the Fed Reserve, that'd be the wrong person to choose. Just as it'd be wrong to choose Jerome Powell to step in and do brain surgery, no matter, if he took a semester of biology in college. So the effect also can apply to the military. A brilliant monetary economist might be Dunning-Krueger about military strategy. So the effect is about the gap between perceived and actual competence in specific areas. Now, here's what makes it especially powerful as an analytical lens and tool for Trump specifically. We know Captain Bonespurs, he believes he is a military strategist and genius. He has genuine competence in certain domains. Real estate development, brand building. He can definitely build a brand better than anyone else, probably. Television performance. Oh, he was great at making us think that he was the master of finance. But He can even say he's a master of political messaging for his followers, at least. Now, these are real skills, but they create a dangerous illusion of transferability. The idea that that knowledge transfers to these other domains, which he is not a master of. He is not a military strategist. He avoided the military with 5 deferments. 5 times he was called upon to serve his nation in Vietnam. 5 times he allowed 5 other people to take his place in Vietnam. So he is not a military strategist. Regardless of the fact that he, went to what? Military high school. His dad sent him off to a military school because his dad was incapable of disciplining him. I don't know. Actually, we do know. But so, this knowledge, this domain that he has, it's not transferable to the Fed chair position nor to the military. That's where we're in danger zone. So, yeah, just because he built buildings and negotiated deals, he believes he can understand construction costs. Hence, the renovation and confrontation with Chairman Powell. Because he made money in real estate when rates were low, right? Remember that, when rates were low, he believes he understands monetary policy. Hence, his insistence that rates should simply be lower, always, without, again, any understanding of economics 101. So there's a wonderful phrase from a political analyst writing about Trump and Iran that captures this whole thing in a nutshell. Trump is the decider, but he decides on the basis of pattern matching from his past experiences rather than on the basis of domain-specific expertise that he doesn't have. So he can be walked into situations that he should not be walked into. When he told his national security team that Tehran would likely capitulate before closing the Strait of Hormuz, because in his model of the world, adversaries always blink when you project strength. Well, he was applying a negotiating heuristic that works in real estate, in any real estate deal. But when you apply that to geopolitical situations governed by entirely different dynamics, now you're going to fall flat in your nose. And that's what we got going on. So what happened? Well, we know Iran did not fully capitulate. The strait was, disrupted. Oil markets spiked. And here we are. That supply shock, that just fed the inflation that we're now trying not to crumble under, right? The inflation fed this economic anxiety that was already building from the tariffs that he came up with and that he's married to. And now the Fed, which Trump was pressuring from day one to cut rates, well, it has even more reason to hold or to raise them. He's just giving it to them, giving them the reason to do that. Every piece of this puzzle makes the others worse. And this common factor is overconfident decision making in a domain where he lacks the expertise to accurately assess his own limitations. Again, that's why I call him Captain Bonespurs, because we know that those bone spurs prevented him from military service, but he's a military genius, according to himself. He's smarter than all the generals, he said before. Now, there's a related dimension to Dunning-Krueger that's important here. Research on overconfident decision makers shows that they are highly resistant to corrective feedback. And we saw that in the video with the chairman, with Mr. Powell, because they can't accurately assess their own knowledge. They can't accurately assess why the feedback is valid. So when Powell corrected Trump on the renovation figures in front of cameras, Trump didn't update his model. He escalated. The Department of Justice investigation intensified. Lisa Cook was fired. The pressure campaign expanded like that pressure cooker boiling point. So the pattern repeats with Iran. When early negotiations stalled and Iran didn't immediately agree to Trump's demands, well, his response wasn't just to recalibrate the whole complexity of the situation. You know, it was to threaten, oh, I'm going to bomb you at a much higher level. And we know that he threatened Iran with nuclear attacks. And he still just said the other day he's going to make the whole country glow. I mean, there's only one bomb that can make a whole country glow. So that threatening to bomb Iran at a much higher level, that was something that only the Dunning-Krueger effect would allow someone to think was something you can take into foreign policy negotiations. So when Iran's counteroffer came, Trump called it a stupid proposal. And he said he couldn't understand why they were talking so long and all going on and on was what he described a very simple document. Well, that phrase, a very simple document for a nuclear arms agreement, between longtime adversaries, that again is just a crystallization of this Dunning-Krueger effect. Yeah, it's just a complete tell of his cards that he says he holds. And observers have noted that whenever Trump is confronted by people with deep expertise, credentialed scientists, credentialed economists, credentialed nuclear physicists, he tends to invoke his uncle, John Trump, who was a physics professor at MIT. Remember, the kid in middle school who used to invoke, oh, but my daddy says, or my daddy's job is, yeah, right back to that, right? It's a way of claiming epistemic proximity to expertise without actually having that expertise. So my genes are smart is not an argument, but that's one he makes. But it reveals someone who knows on some level that credentials matter and they're completely uncomfortable with the fact that they don't have expertise in that domain. All right, y'all. I see we got a few more comments here. I don't want to neglect anyone. All right. So Tom says, one of the more entertaining explanations of the Dunning-Krueger effect is a YouTube short by John Cleese. And yes, I actually have that queued up, John. We're going to show it here. Now might be a good time. Tom says, Bassett brought us for the win. That's his Bassett's we saw earlier. And Tom says, Orville loves to bounce in and back out of the jaw wrestling match. Yeah. All right, let's take a little pause here before we go on a little bit more and look at a very entertaining and good, as Tom was saying, explanation of the Dunning-Krueger effect as John Cleese explained it.
The problem with people like this is that they are so stupid that they have no idea how stupid they are. You see, if you're very, very stupid, how can you possibly realize that you're very, very stupid. You'd have to be relatively intelligent to realize how stupid you are. There's a wonderful bit of research by a guy called David Dunning at Cornell, who's a friend of mine, I'm proud to say, who's pointed out that in order to know how good you are at something requires exactly the same skills as it does to be good at that thing in the first place, which means, and this is terribly funny, that if you're absolutely no good at something at all, then you lack exactly the skills that you need to know that you're absolutely no good at it. The problem with people like this is that...
All right. Yeah, I think that even said it better than the previous scientist I had on there. And he says, hey, he's a friend of Dunning. That's pretty cool. Well, so now we got to look at the fact that now, and this is crucial, there are genuine substantive critiques that we can make of the Fed policy. And some serious economists, they share these critiques. The transitory inflation call was genuinely bad, saying that, transitory inflation is what we know Powell called the inflation after COVID. That was a bad call. The Fed was seriously slow to raise rates. The years of near zero inflation after 2008, well, it just disproportionately gave a benefit to financial asset holders, the wealthy. And while the promised trickle-down benefits to workers, they were slower and thinner than ever. Now, these are legitimate criticisms, but the Dunning-Krueger doesn't mean the person is always wrong also. They say that a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? So it means they arrive at positions through a flawed process, overconfident assertion rather than careful analysis, and they can't tell and distinguish when they happen to be right from when they're wrong, which means even their correct positions tend to be held for the wrong reason, pursued with wrong methods, and escalated when they don't produce immediate results. Which takes us back to an Einstein quote, right? Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, getting bad results, but expecting good results the next time you do it. Well, that ties into the Dunning-Krueger effect. So the Fed's independence fight and the Iran conflict are structurally identical in this sense. We know in both cases, Captain Bonespurs identified a real problem. The Fed's inflation failures, Iran's nuclear program, and these problems required sophisticated, expert-driven solutions. In both cases, he substituted a simple solution: bully the institution into submission. Fire the people who won't comply. You're fired. You don't do what he says, right? Bomb harder when the threat doesn't immediately work. And in both cases, the complexity of the whole system generated consequences that a more expert approach would have anticipated. If he had dissent, active dissent in his cabinet, like we know previous presidents have set up, previous successful presidents have had dissent embedded in their cabinet. If he had that, he would have seen the results coming before it even came in Iran. But in both cases, when those consequences appeared for his decisions with the Fed and with Iran, the explanation was never, I think, guys, maybe we misjudged the complexity. No, you can never say that. It was always traitors, saboteurs. right? Enemies. A stupid proposal. A Fed chair who's too late always and wrong. That's all he can ever say. So again, this brings us now near the end, but to segment 4. Why does this matter beyond Trump? And I think we need one more short puppy break, and then we'll get right to it. Or maybe we'll just go into another explanation of Dunning-Krueger that is a little bit entertaining also. So yeah, let's go check out another entertaining Dunning-Krueger effect explanation.
Something called the Dunning-Krueger effect. The more you learn in a specific skill, the more you realize you don't know. And so if right now you're young and you think you know a lot, I want to tell you it's a psychological fallacy. Like you actually know nothing. Like you think you know it, which is why it's a fallacy. And the reason that some people who are older have disdain for people who are younger is because of this psychological effect. People who are older who have had more experience realize they know less, and then see somebody who's younger, thinks they know more, and they realize the discrepancy in how ignorant it is. And you just look stupid. Something called the Dunning-Krueger effect.
So, yeah, I know that I used to tell my grandfather that I knew he had forgotten more than I know. You know, I told him that back when I was in my 20s. Of course, I had a lot of respect for the man because he was very, very wise. Now, let's also, since this is, again, something that I was spurred on to be interested in when I listened to Frontline, what they have to say, let's get a little bit more of their explanation before we wrap this up. So, Frontline, again, this is Trump versus the Fed. And, you know, well, here we go.
If he wanted to get rid of Powell, Trump was going to need to demonstrate cause, not just his policy frustrations.
Jay Powell back on Capitol Hill today in front of the Senate Finance Committee.
That alleged cause would emerge at a routine hearing before Congress in June.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Chair Powell, for joining us today for such.
Twice a year, Chair Powell goes in front of lawmakers on the Hill to talk about the Fed and answer questions about the economy. But at the June hearing, things took a bit of a turn.
During this time of hardship, the Fed has spent billions on lavish renovations to its DC offices.
Senator Tim Scott, one of President Trump's close allies, led the attack.
Tim Scott.
One of Trump's close sycophants, ass kissers, in plain terms, led the attack.
Starts asking these questions about the renovation of Fed headquarters.
We're talking about rooftop terraces, custom elevators that open into VIP dining rooms, white marble finishes, and even a private art collection.
The Federal Reserve headquarters was built in the 30s. It's almost 100 years old. The Fed had long been pushing this project to overhaul the building.
It was this massive, sprawling project that was running $700 million over budget. It becomes clear that one of the main lines of questioning for these lawmakers is going to be about these renovations.
Would you take a few minutes, please, and explain what's going on with the value of that building and why the costs seem to be so exorbitant?
I came to understand how badly the Eccles building really needed a serious renovation. It never had one. It was not really safe.
I think he bristled at the idea that the Fed was embarking on this absolutely extravagant undertaking.
There are no special elevators. They're old elevators that have been there. There are no new water features. There's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens.
Later in the hearing, Senator Scott cranked up.
And what do we know about this president? Anytime he or his lackeys accuse someone of doing something like that, like building something so extravagant, that's because they're doing it themselves or planning to. And what did we get right after this? This debacle in the East Wing. I'm like, guys, come on. What is it going to take to see that this guy is an egomaniacal narcissist with the Dunning-Krueger effect running through every pore of his freaking being. And we're seeing our great nation being torn asunder because of this crap. Oh, come on, please. So let's talk about this bigger picture, all right? We're back to talking about the stakes and why this matters beyond Trump. So the big picture, because I think, there's a risk that this all becomes another chapter in the endless Trump is bad discourse, and we miss what's generally at stake structurally, okay? The Federal Reserve's independence is not just a technical preference of economists. It's a linchpin of American credibility in global financial markets. When the dollar functions as the world's reserve currency, as it did for so freaking long, when U.S. Treasury bonds are the global safe asset, so around the world, folks look to our Treasury bonds as being globally safe, being something you invest in for security, right? Well, it's partly because the world trusts that American monetary policy is run by technocrats that are insulated from election cycle pressure. That trust is not automatic. It was built over decades and a century, more than a century now. And that trust can erode faster than it was built, far faster. And it has eroded way faster than it took to build this over 100-year monetary trust that folks had in our treasury. When I say folks, I'm talking worldwide had this trust. So let's go back. Remember, the Nixon-Burns episode is the historical warning that we all need to look at. Rates were held low for political reasons all the way through 1972. Inflation embedded itself in expectations. By the mid-1970s, it was a structural crisis. Volcker's cure, 20% interest rates. And I'm 50-something years old, and I still remember folks who were of age then to actually buy a house talking about what it was like to buy a house at 20% interest rates. Those caused unemployment to spike above 10% in this nation. Now, the medicine was far more painful than the disease would have been if it had been treated early. But because of presidential interference by Nixon, it was not treated early. The lesson of that episode, of that Nixon-Burns episode, is exactly the lesson that the advocates of central bank independence draw on. And it's being repeated. When one potentially catastrophic additional variable is now besetting us, and that's this Iran war. Supply shocks from oil and from shipping, man, they're inflationary in ways. But, the interest rate policy is blunt at addressing this problem. The Fed cannot lower the price of oil by cutting rates. So think about that. The Fed is doing all it can with rate structures in order to keep inflation from skyrocketing. But what is now being added on that the Fed can't have anything successful to do with, and that's OPEC, and that is the price of oil nationwide. Fed has nothing to do with that. So that part is out of its control when it comes to inflation. And just got to go back and look at the 70s. What did we have when we had stagflation? We also had an oil crisis that made things worse then, too. If you don't remember, if you weren't born then, go back, read a little history book. So, again, the Fed cannot lower the price of oil by cutting the rates. But if it cuts, the rates anyway, well, that's going to be because political pressure from a new Warsh-led board demands it. And that demand can absolutely make inflation worse by stimulating demand at a moment when supply is constrained. That's that stagflationary spiral that none of us want to get into. That will suck us down. And this time, can we rise out of it? That will be the question. And on Iran specifically, what's remarkable is that the negotiating framework that Captain Bonespurs pursues, it mirrors in a distorted war exactly the competence problem that we've been describing. He wants a deal structured around a very simple document. Simple man can't stand anything but simple documents. But the nuclear age is not a simple age, regardless of what he thinks. We know he loves his aesthetics, but there is no aesthetic to the nuclear age that he could stomach. It takes something thoughtful, long, and very educated and expertise driven. And this buffoon does not have it. So, the JCPOA, that's the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama negotiated and Trump ripped up and burnt when he came into office back when he was president number 45, and he withdrew from it that first term. That document, that JCPOA, was extraordinarily complex precisely because this problem is extraordinarily complex. Verification mechanisms. We need to have mechanisms to be able to verify how high the uranium levels are that are possessed by Iran. Those mechanisms are very, very expertise driven. What can we say? Centrifuge limits. Do you think that this president understands the centrifuge in a nuclear reactor? He thinks he does. Enrichment percentages. Third-party transfer agreements. Sanctions relief timelines. These are all things that are not details you can just hand wave away because they seem like bureaucratic noise to someone who isn't an expert in them. Now, we're focusing on Iran, but if you haven't watched the news, off the coast of Spain, a Russian ship just sunk with nuclear reactors in it. And where were those nuclear reactors headed? To a real nuclear rogue power, North Korea. But again, I digress. We just got to remember this is part of this Dunning-Krueger spiral, and our eyes are off the real nuclear dangers when we're focusing on a country that we have no way of getting control of, but we did have control of it when we had the President Obama JCPOA agreement. We just got to get back to remembering that. That was an expertise-driven agreement. So, again, Iran's counteroffer currently, it's a phased approach, staggered enrichment reduction, demanding sanctions relief before they commit to nuclear limits. It's actually a pretty sophisticated opening position from a negotiating standpoint. But Iran has read the room. Trump called it stupid. Worse than that. Again, from a negotiating theory perspective, asking for your concessions up front while deferring your own commitment is, well, rational. Trump's own deal-making philosophy from the art of the deal would recognize that move. But of course, we know he actually had a ghostwriter write that book. If you didn't know that, go look it up. He didn't write that book. So the irony, of course, and this is just completely a story of irony, is that his self-styled expertise as a deal maker should help him decode Iran's negotiating position. But his overconfidence, he thinks, right? It's really his overconfidence in the simplicity of his own vision prevents him from engaging with the actual complexity of this dire situation. So Dunning-Krueger in action. The very skills he thinks he's applying are being blocked by his overestimation of how well he is applying them. So, guys, what's going to come next? Well, Powell's legacy and the Warsh era. Let's close with a look forward. All right. Powell's term as chair ends in 3 days. Kevin Warsh is going to take over. Powell stays on the board until 2028. And what does the landscape look like then? Well, Bloomberg has recently decided that a profile of Powell's legacy is going to capture what I think will be a historical verdict. Historians are already framing his final chapter as fundamentally about institutional defense rather than monetary policy per se. Leading Fed historian Peter Conti Brown says his real testing moments were the COVID crisis and then Trump's all-out assault on the central bank's independence in 2025 and now in 2026. He says that Powell's place in history is secured on the basis of either one of these. So Warsh faces a genuinely difficult hand. He's expected to be more amenable to rate cuts because Trump's demanding them. You got to, listen to daddy. And that's, of course, the whole reason that Trump chose him. He knows he's going to be daddy's boy. But the Fed, and the Fed's regional bank presidents whose terms run to 2031, they're not going to simply follow the Trump rule, regardless of what Warsh says. Powell dissenting as a board governor will get enormous attention from the markets. Every Warsh rate cut that Powell votes against is going to be a story. We're going to read about it in The Economist. We're going to read about it in Bloomberg. Yeah, they're going to be real stories every time. The institutional conflict that Trump tried to end by replacing the chair is, of course, in the end, in some ways, going to be more visible than ever. And the Iran situation is going to hang over all of this. If the war continues or escalates, as we know somebody wants it to, oil supply disruptions are going to keep inflation stagflation. Think about it. And that stagflation, man, that's going to be an environment that any Fed rate cuts that Warsh pushes for, they're going to face ferocious internal resistance and market skepticism. So the scenario that serious economists most fear, that stagflation, whether you have both high inflation and sluggish growth, they become more plausible, not less, the more that the institutional guardrails are weakened. And what is this guy about overall? Weakening the guardrails. Now, Trump's theory of the case was this: fire the people standing in my way. You're fired. Install my people, get my policy. He did it on TV. He thinks he can do it here. What he may have created instead is an institution more divided, more politically scrutinized, and less credible than the one he inherited. Exactly the opposite of what low rate growth friendly monetary policy requires. And that, in a nutshell, again, is the Dunning-Krueger tragedy at a civilizational scale. Not just on the personal scale of this idiot in chief, but on a civilizational scale. It's not just our civilization at stake. The overconfident actor doesn't just fail to achieve their goal. They often make the underlying problem structurally worse because they lack the expertise to anticipate the second and third order effects of their interventions. Think about it. The man who wanted cheap money may have made money far more expensive. The man who wanted to end Iran's nuclear program has so far entrenched it. And the man who thought he was going to change what? The Gulf of Hormuz now showed Iran it's got power it didn't know it had over the Gulf of Hormuz. So the president who wanted again to fire the Fed chair may have made that chair more powerful than ever. Just watch the stories that are going to come out of Bloomberg and The Economist. So again, guys, that's the Dunning-Krueger presidency. Not stupidity, something more specific, in some ways more insidiously dangerous. Overconfidence precisely calibrated to prevent self-correction. So, if you haven't watched Frontlines, the President versus the Fed, grab some popcorn and your favorite beverage. It's available now at pbs.org/frontline. It's on the PBS app, it's on YouTube, and it's on Prime Video. Yeah, I know I don't like to advertise for Prime, but it's there. It's essential viewing for anyone trying to understand this moment in our nation's history, and our state's history, and our county's history, and the history of Western civilization. Civilization, period. So, whatever your politics, the psychological and the institutional questions, they're going to outlast any individual president. How do democratic societies maintain expert institutions against short-term political pressure? This isn't a partisan question. It's not a left versus right question. It's not a Democrat versus Republican question at all. This is an existential one. Now, hopefully, we've given you something to chew on. Talk about it over the water cooler. Definitely talk about it when you make calls to our representatives in Kentucky. Call the senators. Call your representative. Let's get serious. It's time. And for what's going on right now, let's do not forget, guys, we are only a few days away from the primaries, right? 19th is the primary day. I went in and voted today. Because I have the ability to do that. And if you haven't already gone to vote, No excuse. Early voting starts in just a couple days. This is real serious. Look at who is on the primary ballot of your party. Choose someone that you know is not going to be a facilitator of this Dunning-Krueger presidency. And we've got folks on the ballots that are not going to facilitate this anymore. We've got a representative in this state who is not facilitating this Dunning-Krueger president when it really, really matters. Do I agree with that person on everything? No. But they're up and down your ballot. Look carefully and really consider, is the candidate that you're going to vote for going to be strong enough, have the intestinal fortitude to go against this seemingly powerful regime? That's what we've got to look at. All right, y'all. Let's see what other comments we have. Come down to the end of my talking points, because it all is going to end up being decided in November if we make the right choices in these primaries. All right, Scorpio says, what the F am I sniveling about? Well, man, if you're not sniveling about inflation, I don't know where you've been. All right, Darren Connolly, we're on the verge of the biggest economic depression in American history, worse than the one in 1929. And gosh, Darren, I can't sit here and act like we're not. I'm trying to send out the warning signals. We're trying to you and me, Darren, we're trying to send out the bat signals. All right, is there anyone listening? Tom says, Scorpio, C3Q is clearly a bot. Yeah. Maggot Destroyer says, Donald's depression, Republicans' recession. Yeah, absolutely. Darren Connolly, Maggot Destroyer, great name. Absolutely. Hopefully they don't consider that to be similar to, 6947 or 8647. Maggot Destroyer says, thanks. Darren Connolly, it amazes me how MAGA is so deep in the cult that they have to pretend that Trump's failed policies aren't affecting them like the rest of us when they're suffering at the pump and the grocery stores too. Yeah, thanks, Darren. It's exactly what I wanted to reply to the bot earlier. You're acting like this isn't affecting you? Oh my gosh. Darren says, America is only great if you're in the 1%. The rest of us are getting the crumbs, and MAGA doesn't understand that we're all eating from the same plate. Yeah, the so-called trickle-down economics, that's that urine, trickling down their legs after they zip up their pants, the 1%, and we're supposed to just lap up their urine and say that, yeah, we needed that trickle down. Yeah, I'm not buying it. I'm not lapping that up. I'll lap up some bourbon. That's about it. All right. Darren Connolly says, I call him the orange buffoon. Yeah, that's a good one. Captain Bonespurs, Sleepy Don. I mean, what else can we not say about this guy? Laura Bush, USA. Hi there. I'm former First Lady Laura Bush. George fell off the tractor today and Secret Service left us alone at the ranch. Can you Venmo us $40 so we can get a KFC family feast with molten lava cake? Love it. Love it. That's definitely hilarious. Tom, LOL at the last comment. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, man. Some great comedians here. That one probably should get maybe what is it? Not a Tom Sawyer award. Mark Twain award. Yeah. All right, Tom. It's almost like a Nigerian prince email. Yeah, that's way better than the Nigerian prince emails. Oh, Jimmy Myers, Donald, Jimmy Carter, Trump. Yeah, well, ducats. Trump will succeed and go on to be the best president of the last 50 years. All right, another bot at us, right? Yeah. Jimmy Myers, Ronald Reagan. The last thing you want to hear is the government is here to help. Rhino MAGA, the president is going to save me, like some kind of socialism. How did that work out? Lolly Davis, thumbs down to the orange clown with the tiny bruised hands who would be king. Jimmy Myers, the Deep South is still just a bunch of Dixiecrats. They haven't changed since the 60s. Jimmy Myers, the only thing that changed with the Dixiecrats is they went into the Republican Party. Yeah, we definitely, yep. Lloyd Davis, it went from a $200 million ballroom, totally paid for by friends and donors, never touching the East Wing of the White House, to a $1 billion throne room, paid for by the American taxpayers. Yeah, exactly. That's why, as I was, I'm going to play the rest of the clip there from this PBS Frontline documentary, but I had to stop it because I just could not take, the senator from, or the congressman from South Carolina grilling Powell about the cost of renovating the 100-year-old building that the Fed's in, when we know that everything he was accusing Powell of doing is what Trump is now doing, with trying to do it, that at least with the East Wing. So thank you very much, Lloyd Davis. Absolutely. Jimmy Myers, I think you meant to say the Freddy Krueger president. Looks like a lot of us are on a roll. I love it. Lloyd Davis, Trump has agreed to Qatar having a military installation on the U.S. mainland. Yes, I've talked about that before, Lloyd. You're absolutely correct. Has ordered the extrajudicial murder of citizens of another sovereign nation outside the U.S. territory by the U.S. military. Yeah, Qatar is going to have a base here in Idaho. They have it already. Jonathan Firestone, after Biden, America needed a Trump. Let's see what happens. We're seeing what happens. Yeah. Lloyd, but he doesn't plan on leaving the Oval Office again, ever, unless he's in a body bag. Or SEAL Team 6 drags him out in a straitjacket and handcuffs, kicking and screaming in front of the press. All right, David Aiken. Joe had 4 years to screw things up. Give me a break. Oh, wait. Trump did. F-O. Slick Nick. Trump is a brilliant leader. Man. Jimmy Myers. After this is over, someone needs to explain the definition of conservative. They obviously don't know what it is anymore. Yeah. One of my fellow folks that's running for magistrate here, it's like I said, I'm running for magistrate District 3. He said it just the way you're saying it. He's saying he claims he is a conservative Democrat. He says, what does he mean by conservative? Well, he grew up poor and he had to learn how to conserve everything he had. What more of a definition can you give for conservative that better fits what it really means and should mean? Good one. Len. Yeah, Len, no. Democrats did not get us into war with Iran. You guys said that they were going to if we elected them. But nope, this guy got us into war with Iran, which drove stagflation sky high for this oil. This guy is the one who shut down BRIC, which is that building resilient infrastructure for our communities. He's the one who tried to close it off and did last year until now the courts opened it up again. So our community here in Hardin County can actually get the grants that we already had allocated to us, but we have to reapply for them now. Yeah, it wasn't Democrats that did that. Jimmy Myers. Yes, we know Donald Trump is a Democrat from New York. Slick Nick. Trump is the king, peace warrior of the world. All right. Jimmy Myers, can someone explain that in English? King, peace warrior. Don't speak Russian. Lloyd Davis, we've seen what Trump has done already. We've seen exactly what kind of dictatorship he's leading, and it's only going to get worse from here on out. Time to get him out of the White House ASAP. Well, you know, he's got, a couple more years? But the elections, midterms, they're coming up. No matter how they gerrymander it, we can all go in there and change the course. That's what we have the power to do if we will only do it. Jimmy Myers, I think this is a Dixiecrat-Democrat civil war because Obama was black. Yeah. And by Dixiecrat, you said earlier you mean Republicans. Civil war because Obama was black. Yeah, we know you're right. Slick Nick. Trump, leadership, absolute. All right, y'all. This has been amazing. Longer than I intended, but definitely, wow, had more comments than I expected. Thank you so much for taking time to pay attention, to listen, to talk, to think. Yeah. So, y'all, again, it's not about left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. It is about all of us working folks versus the Epstein class, versus the billionaire class that want to be the autocrats, that currently are the autocrats. We have the power if we will go to the polls, take part in the primaries, get serious. I was just at a meeting with the fiscal court, and I was in attendance in the audience. Our county clerk here in Hardin County said this primary so far, and we haven't even hit the 19th, which is the primary day, we've had more registered participation than we did during the last presidential election. Guys, that gives me hope. Something could possibly happening for the positive. Folks might be waking up and not listening to the bots. So again, we're remembering, I hope, please, oh please, I hope that we're remembering our Kentucky motto, united we stand, divided we fall. I think that we're remembering, we're all in this together. We love our neighbors as ourselves. We know that we are our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper, because if we're in it, united together, we're not going to fall. And we won't fall anymore for this Dunning-Krueger effect autocracy. Y'all, bless you. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week. Remember everyone deployed overseas. Bless your corazón, which is Spanish for heart. And let's all stick to it together and make a change together. We've got the power is ours.
Because in the bank foreclosed on farms